So I've been a public appointments assessor for nearly 3 years, and I find it really interesting. I've come to it because I was a judicial appointments commissioner, and that was just appointing judges. This is sort of broader. Before that, I've had public appointments myself, but my background is as a journalist in broadcasting.
I'm Sarah Anderson, and I joined the public appointments assessors nearly 3 years ago. I did it from a background in the private sector, running my own businesses, small businesses initially, and then I got into the public sector taking up appointments myself and was a non-executive director on a number of large public sector boards. But I always see my background very much as private sector, and I think it's interesting with the applicants we see who come from both the private and the public sector. And they both take a slightly different approach to applying for these jobs. And I think one of the roles as chair is to ensure people look at this with parity, that they actually are not confined by a public sector background or their civil service background to say this is the only way people express themselves.
Really our role, it's about ensuring fairness and transparency. And I think also asking questions about the pools and the candidates and the diversity, all of which I think are important. And beyond that, of course, we're then chairing all the meetings, the shortlisting, we're chairing the panel, we're chairing the discussions. And then if the minister wants to meet the candidates who are appointable, then we're going with and ensuring that that too is a fair and transparent process.
So a lot of people ask me how people even find out about public sector appointments.
Yes, and I think it's two things, isn't it? One is you get on the list, the kind of email that comes out weekly, and that has an awful lot of them on it, and it tells you when to apply. And the other is your own networks and being aware of what it is you're interested in, making sure that your circles know what you're interested in, so they put people in touch with you. So I think there's the formal part, which is the notifications you get from the Cabinet Office if you just sign up for their email, and then there's the informal part of letting people know that you're interested and that you want something to do.
And then I guess people ask me about what is the process.
It is important when you see the process and you think about applying that what you do is you do keep to the deadline. It's all right, very well thinking about it for a bit, but really the deadline means the deadline. You have to get your application in by that stage. You need to know who your referees are going to be. You've got to have thought through whether you really want to do it and whether you've got the time to do it. Some of these appointments, you're going to have maybe a headhunter conversation, then you might be long-listed, then there might be a headhunter interview, then you've got a panel interview, and you might have to do a presentation at the panel interview. If you're going for a chair, that's really quite likely. Then if you're appointable, you've got to meet the minister if he wants to meet you.
They do need to look at the advert and see what the criteria are that are really required for the job. And hopefully with our input, that would be criteria that isn't so much about experience but about ability. And that's something that I think people don't always relate their own experience to what it is that we're looking for.
I must say, when I'm chairing an exercise, I do try and make sure that the criteria are about transferable skills, about demonstrating how you could cope rather than proving that you've already been a chair at this level before, for instance.
It's normally that people would write a statement, just a couple of pages, explaining examples of how they meet the criteria for the job, and then enclosing a CV. So it should not be an onerous application process. I think that after interviews, if you've got through to the interview stage and you don't get through, I think it is reasonable to ask for feedback, and therefore you can learn from those experiences. And I think it's also useful to have more than one example up your sleeve, because if you put one example in the application form, the interview becomes hugely repetitive if you give the same example again when the questions are asked.
And the other thing I think is to think of examples that are as recent as possible. If you give examples persistently that are over 10 years old, the panel is going to think you have no recent relevant experience. I think it's really important.
We should perhaps explain that there's normally 3 or more people on the panel, one who's a technical expert, who, if you like, might be the person who the position is reporting to. We would be chairing it as public appointment assessors, and there would be an independent panel member. And one thing we are trying to do at interviews is to get the best out of people. We're not trying to find them out or to trick them or anything else. And so I think it's important to come in with that understanding.
If you are asked to do a presentation, I think the important 3 things is that you are specific, that you talk about as much as you know about the job that you are applying for, and that you don't ramble on too long. Because actually the point of the presentation, I think, is twofold. One is so the panel can assess how you would be in doing a presentation and how much you understand what is to be done. But the other is that for some people, it is a settling process. Some people find that by the time they've heard themselves speak for 3 or 4 minutes, they've settled down into the interview and can then give the best of themselves for the rest of the 45 odd minutes.
The panel will decide which candidates are appointable and which ones aren't. It is actually the minister who makes the decision between the appointable candidates.
I've found the ministers I have gone to interviews with candidates have been really deeply concerned to find the best possible person they can, and to do it in as interesting a way as possible. They want, if this person is going to work to them, to report to them at any rate, they want to know that this is somebody they can rely on to do the job well. And that's essentially the biggest thing they want to know.